Hey guys, tonight we wake up somewhere truly ridiculous, nestled under a silk canopy in a marble palace where the ceilings are higher than your ambitions and the air smells faintly of crushed roses and ego. A servant is fanning you with an ostrich feather, but honestly, it's not helping. Your head is pounding. Too much wine at last night's banquet, and you can already hear the distant chaos of morning business in the forum. But you don't care, because here's the thing, you're Emperor Caligula. And your first concern this morning is deeply pressing your horse is missing. Not just any horse. No, Incitatus, the steed of steeds, the imperial thunder pony, your one true confidant in this circus called Rome. He usually sleeps just 2 rooms over, in a marble stall obviously. But this morning, no clip-clop of hooves on polished tile greets you. A servant stammers something about the stable boy taking him out for a sunrise trot. You glare. You didn't authorize that. This is going to be a long day. So, strict codes. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed and rub your temples. That infernal marble floor is cold, strict codes. Even in summer. It doesn't help that your toga is halfway around your neck and there's still some gold leaf stuck to your elbows. Codes, the after effects of last night's imperial reverie. You're not sure if you declared war on Neptune again or just tried to rename all the weekdays after your relatives. Outside the window, Rome stretches in layers of heat and haze, the aqueducts snake across the land like sleeping titans. Far below, markets bustle and scam artists already shout about miracle lives. But up here, you emperor. Everyone else is background noise, props in your theatre, strict codes. You shuffle toward the private atrium and splash water over your face from a silver basin shaped like a dolphin. There's something comforting about morning rituals, at least the parts that don't involve Senate drama or angry priests writing you letters in Latin calligraphy, codes. As you pat your face dry with embroidered linen, you mentally review your schedule, some state business, yes, but mostly time blocked off for staring into the middle distance and philosophizing about how great it would be if your horse ran the Vestal Virgins. Joking. Maybe. Honestly, it's hard to tell anymore where the performance ends and your real thoughts begin, even for you. Because when you're born into a world of gods and emperors, raised in rooms echoing with conspiracies and opulence, something happens to the brain. It softens at the edges, like overcooked figs. You grew up watching your uncle Tiberius run the empire from an island, surrounded by rumors darker than a moonless Roman ally. You learned early on that power doesn't just corrupt. It also isolates. And frankly, it gets really boring after a while. So you started experimenting, not with poisons, at least not this early in the day, but with ideas. Like, what if your horse was happier than half your advisors? What if divine favor had 4 legs and a glistening mane? What if a society built on tradition needed a good hoof to the ribs? Historians still argue whether you were dead serious, completely mad, or just the world's most expensive performance artist. Some think you were clinically unhinged. Others see layers of irony that would make modern satirists jealous. Then there are those who say, quietly, always quietly, that maybe you saw Rome a little too clearly. Anyway, you wrap yourself in fresh robes, dark purple trimmed in gold, the color of emperors and pretension. You descend a staircase so grand it could double as a stage, passing bust of ancestors glaring disapprovingly, probably jealous. Downstairs your guards salute with practiced stiffness. One of them has a lazy eye. You mentally note it. The lazy eye ones always have good gossip. Have them prepare breakfast, you mutter, and find Incitatus. If he's been kidnapped, the Senate will suffer. Is that a joke? They never know. That's half the fun. As you enter the dining room, a space with more columns than most towns, You pass your favorite mosaic, it shows Neptune riding dolphins into battle. Very unrealistic. Dolphins are pacifists, everyone knows that. Still, it's got flair. Your kind of flair. A platter arrives. Dates, figs, codes. Some barely toasted bread that costs more than a slave's freedom. You poke at it. Food's more ceremonial than satisfying when you're emperor. The real meal is power. That and maybe a conversation with your horse. A scribe approaches. He's already sweating through his tunic, poor soul. Something about a grain shortage in Egypt. Something about unrest in Gaul. Something about a petition from senators regarding decorum. You wave him off with a flick that's half emperor, half exhausted dad. You'll pretend to care about all that later. Right now, your thoughts keep drifting back to Incitatus. You once gave him a necklace of emeralds. He prefers opals, you think. It's hard to tell with horses, but you're convinced you've learned to read his expressions. Especially the one that says, "This chariot is beneath me." You once whispered to a stunned general that Incitatus would soon oversee religious rites. The man blinked so slowly you thought he might be dying. But he nodded, because when you're emperor, people nod. Even when you say absurd things. Especially then. And the absurd is comforting, isn't it? In a world so fragile and blood-soaked, ridiculousness becomes a shield. If you laugh first, the world can't laugh at you. If your horse leads prayers, maybe the gods will finally show up on time. You sip watered wine. It's too early for the strong stuff. But let's not pretend it's not tempting. Somewhere beyond the palace, Rome groans to life. Vendors shout, soldiers march, and children run barefoot through dust. But here, in your candle-scented, silk-draped bubble, the day unfolds at your pace. And step by step, thought by thought, your strange, horse-shaped plan starts to feel a little more reasonable. After all, who better to bless the state than a creature that can't lie, can't cheat, strict codes, and probably understands the moral decay of the Senate better than half its members. You step out onto the terrace, the early Roman sun already turning the city into a shimmering basin of gold and dust. From up here, the empire stretches toward the horizon like a sleeping giant. Red-tiled roofs cluster like seashells around the forum, and plumes of temple smoke rise lazily into the pale blue sky. You squint into the distance, but there's no sign of Incitatus. Not yet. A guard clears his throat behind you. You sigh. This probably isn't good. "Sire," he begins, eyes fixed on the mosaic floor. "We've located the animal." You turn slowly, channeling the full weight of your imperial stare. "Animal. Your horse, I mean. He's in the east garden, refusing to move." Again, you pause. Did anyone ask him nicely? There's a beat of silence. You can feel the guard weighing his chances of surviving this conversation. "No, sire." "Well then." You sigh. Perhaps that's why he's still sitting under the olive tree like a disgruntled senator. The thing is, Incitatus isn't just a horse. He's your companion, your symbol, your living rebuke to the petty seriousness of the Roman elite. You named him Swift because it was ironic. He's lazy, dramatic, completely unimpressed by rank. Honestly, if he were human, he'd be perfect for the consulship. That's the kind of joke you've whispered at feasts. Some guests laugh, others turn pale. You enjoy both reactions equally. You walk slowly through the palace's east corridor, trailing your fingers along cool marble columns. Murals of past emperors glare down at you. Augustus, all noble and chin forward. Tiberius, shrouded in gloom. And you, well, not yet. You haven't sat long enough for a proper mosaic, maybe something dramatic, like riding Incitatus through a storm while thunder gods applaud. You emerge into the east garden. It's as absurdly well manicured as ever. Rows of lavender line the paths, bees hum peacefully, and statues of minor gods pose dramatically between the hedges. And there, under a tree that's older than your entire family line, stands Incitatus. Well, technically reclines. He's sprawled like a sun-drenched diva, one hoof twitching lazily, his glossy coat catching the light like armor. He looks like he just finished reciting a sonnet to the wind. You kneel beside him. Morning, dear heart. He flicks an ear. I see you've rejected the Senate's latest appeal. Another flick. This is practically a standing ovation by incitatus standards. Historians still argue whether you ever truly loved this horse, or whether he was just a stunt, a prank wrapped in a crown. But watching him now, with his half-lidded eyes and disdainful air, it's hard not to feel something genuine. He's simple, yes, but in a way that people never are. He doesn't scheme. He doesn't flatter. He doesn't compose poison-laced poems about you in secret. Also, he once kicked a visiting Digtree square in the shin. Iconic. You feed him a fig. He chews slowly, as if considering its existential implications. Today, you tell him, we make history. He doesn't respond, but he doesn't bolt either. That's as good as consent. You have the stable boys prepare his ceremonial harness, the one with the polished bronze fittings and velvet saddle. Yes, velvet. Only the best for Rome's most misunderstood theologian. They're used to your whims by now. No one even flinches when you mention taking him to the Temple of Mars later. Back inside, the palace begins to buzz. Advisors drift in and out like pale, nervous bees. One of them, Cassianus, you think, though honestly you stopped learning their names, mentions an ambassador from Parthia arriving later. You wave him away. You've got a more pressing matter to attend to. How exactly does one ordain a horse? The Senate, naturally, has been outraged for weeks. They thought it was a joke when you told them Incitatus would be appointed to priestly duties. Then you started commissioning ceremonial garb, gold thread, laurel wreath, even a tiny silver cup for wine blessings. That's when the letters began pouring in. Pleas for your sanity, veiled threats, not so veiled threats. It's all terribly predictable. You lean back on a couch in your reading chamber while a servant oils your hands. The room is cool and quiet, lined with scrolls and silence. You've surrounded yourself with Stoic philosophy lately, Seneca, Epictetus. But honestly, their warnings about pride and hubris are starting to sound like personal attacks. Let them rage. You murmur to no one in particular. Strict codes. Let them write their little notes and whisper behind their curtains. When Incitatus becomes priest, they'll have to kneel in front of him. You smirk at the image. Ground men in ceremonial robes bowing to a horse who just sneezed on the altar. Codes. It's almost too good. And beneath the joke, there's a message. You know it. The whole empire feels like it's holding its breath, torn between tradition and chaos, reverence and absurdity. If you can stretch belief far enough, or you might just snap it, or reveal what a thin thread it always was. You rise, motion for your toga to be adjusted. Today's version has a woven border of sea creatures, left over from your brief campaign to be declared the god of the sea. You'd forgotten about that. Neptune didn't return your calls, but the clamshell motif was a hit. You make your way to the outer hall. Incitatus is being led there by two handlers who look mildly traumatized. One of them has fig juice on his sleeve. The other mutters a quiet prayer, probably for the horse. You mount slowly, regally. Incitatus snorts but allows it. A servant steps forward with a crown of ivy and gingerly places it on the horse's head. He shakes it off. You place it back. The procession begins. As you exit the palace gates, people bow, confused and curious. A few cheer, some whisper. One old woman crosses herself and scurries into an alley. Standard reaction, really. You ride through the forum, flanked by guards in glittering armor. The crowds part. The Senate sends a small delegation to observe. You make eye contact with a particularly sweaty senator and smile serenely. He flinches. Perfect. Up the marble steps of the temple you go, Incitatus clopping gently, rhythmically. At the top, you dismount and hold up a goblet. Priests hover nearby, too stunned to interrupt. The sunlight catches the gold rim just so. You clear your throat. I declare this beast a vessel of the divine. You say, and may he bless us with honesty, speed, and exceptionally clean hooves. The crowd stares, someone giggles, someone else gasps. Incitatus sneezes. And in that moment, absurd, glittering, surreal, you feel more like a god than you ever have. Incitatus doesn't move for a good 5 minutes after the ceremony. He stands squarely in the middle of the Temple of Mars, sniffing the incense like he's judging the scent profile. You half expect him to demand sandalwood next time. The priests hover nearby, their faces frozen in that special Roman expression. Equal parts awe and internal screaming. Eventually, he flicks his tail and saunters out, completely unimpressed with his divine promotion. A small child claps. A senator faints. You, naturally, wave regally to both. Back at the palace, a word spreads faster than a poorly guarded wine jug. Incitatus has been ordained. No, really, the priests blessed him. The emperor spoke. There was even a wreath. The Senate is now officially in a apoplectic disarray. You recline on a dais in your private hall, sipping watered wine and picking at a platter of honeyed dates. A musician plucks a slow, sleepy tune nearby, the kind meant for warm afternoons and half-sincere poetry. You let it wash over you like sunlight. Life, as they say, is for the dramatic. Cassianus shows up again. The poor man always looks like he's just watched a goat walk into his bedroom. He clears his throat. Sire, with respect, the people are concerned. You raise one eyebrow. Are they more concerned than yesterday's dolphin-shaped tax reform? He blinks. Marginally, yes. You know what he's not saying. The Senate is furious. The nobles are mortified. And the people are confused. Some cheer. Some scoff. Some have already started wearing horse amulets for luck. You can't decide if that's brilliant or horrifying. Historians still argue whether this whole horse as priest thing was the act of a madman or a satirical genius. Strict codes. One school of thought insists you were mocking the Senate's useless rituals, exposing the ridiculousness of power itself. Another insists you had truly lost the plot, turning Rome into your personal absurdist stage play. You sip more wine. Maybe they're both right. Maybe that's the point. You spend the evening overseeing Incitatus's new quarters. Yes, new. You've ordered a wing of the palace refurbished. Marble trows, velvet-lined stalls, and a bronze plaque reading, High Priest of the Divine Cantor. No one thanks you, of course. Your vision is always underappreciated in its time. A court poet stops by with a scroll of hastily written verses. You listen with your eyes closed. Oh, hooves that strike the sacred stone, they breath doth carry prayers unknown. You open one eye. It's terrible. Write it again, but this time includes something about justice and oats. The poet nods and scurries off like his robe's on fire. Incitatus, now munching noisily on a pile of imported apples, turns his head toward you. You smile. Don't let it go to your head. The thing is, people believe what they're told to believe, especially when it's wrapped in ceremony and velvet. You've been testing that for years now, declaring wars over clouds, inventing gods for convenience, hosting feasts where the courses are served in reverse just to see who complains. You once made a senator eat a rose petal and told him it symbolized loyalty. He wept with gratitude. He's probably weeping still. It's not that you hate Rome. On the contrary, you love it too much to let it decay quietly. You want to wake it up, shake it out of its pomp and marble inertia. And if you need a divine horse to do that, well, so be it. Later that night, you host a private banquet. Guests arrive in gazy robes, their expressions carefully neutral. You know half of them are spies, the other half are sycophants. There might be one poet among them. Maybe. You make them sit on low couches and serve the food yourself for the first course. That throws them. The emperor pouring wine. Blasphemy. Relax, you murmur. It's not poison this time. Nervous laughter all around. You love this part. You raise a toast. To the only member of this room who has never lied to me. Incitatus! He's not here, of course. He's sleeping. He has a long day tomorrow, blessing grain shipments and pretending to listen to confessions. But invoking his name makes the tension deliciously uncomfortable. One guest dares to raise a question. A young nobleman with hopeful eyes and a jawline you could build a statue on. Sire, respectfully, is it wise to mock the gods? You tilt your head. Who said anything about mocking? Perhaps the gods enjoy a bit of humor. Maybe Jupiter loves a good neigh. There's a silence thick enough to slice. You lean forward. Or maybe the gods have long since abandoned us, and Incitatus is the best we've got. A few people chuckle carefully. A few shift uncomfortably. The young nobleman turns pink. You wave it off. Besides, he's got better hair than most senators. Strict codes. Don't pretend that doesn't count. After dessert, peacock tongues dipped in honey. Because of course. You dismiss the crowd and wander alone through the upper gardens. The moonlight falls in silver sheets over the statues, and the breeze carries the faint scent of rosemary and smoke. You sit beside a fountain shaped like Neptune wrestling a squid. Why did you approve that design? You can't remember. It's ridiculous. You love it. The stars blink down at you, and for a moment you wonder if they're watching or just pretending to. You think about your father, your predecessors, the endless roll of emperors before you. So serious, so rigid, so utterly forgettable. You'd rather be remembered for a horse than forgotten for being cautious. Your footsteps echo softly as you make your way back to your chambers. The palace quiets. Even the city below seems to exhale. In your private stables, Incitatus does his peacefully, one leg twitching in sleep. You pause, watch him, feel the weight of silence pressing gently against your shoulders. "Good night, your holiness," you whisper and head to bed. Tomorrow, you'll announce that Incitatus is considering a second post. Possibly oracle, or maybe ambassador to Egypt. Let them try to argue with a creature who responds to every question with a huff and a tail swish. Honestly, it might be an improvement. Strict codes. Morning in Rome breaks with the sort of sunlight that makes marble glow like it's been washed in gold. You stretch in your enormous bed. Silk sheets tangled like diplomatic treaties. And listen to the faint, rhythmic clatter of hooves in the distance. Incitatus must be awake. Hopefully, he's not trying to bless the fish market again. That got messy last time. You rise and drift toward your balcony. The city sprawls below you in a jumbled symphony of rooftops, shouting merchants, fluttering laundry, and columns standing dramatically like they're waiting for someone to paint them. You breathe in the scent of baked bread, distant smoke, and ambition. Your morning routine is unconventional. No early war councils or stiff Senate meetings. Instead, you start your day in the Imperial Aviary, where you whisper to flamingos and try to convince a particularly judgmental ibis to wear a tiny crown. It refuses, as always. One day you'll win. Cassianus appears mid-fig. The Senate is waiting. You pop the rest of the fig into your mouth. Are they ever not? They've drafted a formal protest regarding Incitatus. Ah, which part? He clears his throat. The priesthood. And the mural in the forum. Right. The mural. You commissioned that after a particularly long bath. An epic, sprawling painting of Incitatus ascending to the heavens, flanked by doves and weeping senators. It's dramatic. You pull on your imperial robe, pausing to admire the embroidery. Gold thread stitched into images of wheat, wine, and, naturally, horses. Because subtlety is a coward's virtue. As you walk toward the Curia, the Senate's meeting hall, you pass through the heart of Roman bureaucracy, slaves hustling parchment, scribes arguing over phrasing, and a suspiciously large number of people pretending to be busier than they are. You stride into the Senate with a smile that says, "Might rewrite reality today." The senators, draped in togas and anxiety, rise with the respect due to someone who once threatened to rename the months after household objects. You wave them down. A senior senator clears his throat. He's got the kind of voice that suggests he hasn't had a new idea since Augustus. "Your Excellency, we are troubled. The priesthood is a sacred institution." "Indeed," you nod, which is why it needed refreshing. "You're welcome." Murmurs. Eye twitches. One man visibly sweats through his laurel wreath. Another senator chimes in. And the mural, the imagery is, shall we say, unorthodox. You arch an eyebrow. Too many doves. He blinks. That's not the point. But it is really. Rome is an empire built on spectacle, on ritual, on the illusion of eternal order. You've merely started poking the edges of that illusion like a bored child with a stick and a sandcastle. Historians still argue whether your confrontation with the Senate was a calculated satire or a slow, spectacular descent into parody. Some say you knew exactly what you were doing, exposing the farce of tradition by doubling down on absurdity. Others say you genuinely believed the horse could mediate divine will. Honestly, you're not sure either. You stand and approach the center of the hall. Gentlemen, Rome is not dying because of a horse. Rome is dying because it refuses to evolve. You fear Incitatus, not because he's unworthy, but because he reminds you how replaceable you all are. There's a beat of stunned silence. Somewhere, a scribe drops a quill. Then you smile. Besides, he never falls asleep during temple offerings. That's more than I can say for half of you. You turn and exit before anyone can summon the courage to object. It's called controlling the narrative. Later, in the imperial bathhouse, because ruling is best done with citrus oil and steam, you soak beside a marble lion spout and contemplate your next move. Incitatus, ever the professional, is getting fitted for a ceremonial cloak. The tailor complains that horses are not built for fashion. You reply, neither are senators, but we dress them anyway. You spend the afternoon drafting new edicts. Some are serious, better grain allotments, improved roads in the provinces. Others are pure theatre, a festival in honor of Incitatus' birthday, date TBD, mandatory poetry recitals in the marketplace, and a proposal to rename one of the 7 hills Mount Gallop. Your advisors look worried. One even asks if you're mocking the empire. You lean in, voice low and conspiratorial, mocking it. I am the empire. That night, you host another dinner, this one smaller, filled with your inner circle. Trusted friends, thinkers, a few wild-eyed astrologers. You bring up the question that's been nipping at your mind like a bored spaniel. Can a symbol be more powerful than reason? A philosopher chews thoughtfully on a fig. Only when reason has failed, you nod. That sounds right. Then, perhaps, you muse, Incitatus isn't a joke. He's a mirror. The table falls silent, the kind of silence that smells like revelation. Outside, the torches flicker against the twilight. Rome breathes its slow, ancient rhythm. Inside, you imagine your marble murals coming to life. Horses blessing vineyards. Senators braying for attention, the city wrapped in satire and incense. You end the night with a stroll through the imperial menagerie, scratching behind the ears of a leopard named Tiberius. He yawns like he's bored of history. You relate. Before bed, you stop by Incitatus' quarters. He's asleep, again. You whisper, hope you're ready for tomorrow. I'm thinking, divine prophecy. He snorts in his sleep. You'll take that as a yes. Morning again, and the city wakes slower than you do. Rome may be eternal, but it's also mildly grumpy before breakfast. You roll out of bed with that imperial sort of groan that says, I might be descended from gods, but my knees disagree. Today's sunlight sneaks in sideways, slicing through the guy's curtains and painting golden stripes across your floor mosaic, one that you'd commissioned in the shape of a galloping horse. Obviously, you reach for a pomegranate slice and casually wave off a servant attempting to comb your hair like it's a state matter. Not today, you mutter. Let's go unraveled. Your attendants exchange nervous glances. That always means something chaotic is about to happen. You march straight into your audience chamber, robe slightly off kilter and hair only 70% regal. The room hushes. You're meeting with foreign envoys this morning. The Parthian delegation is already waiting, stiff and ceremonial, with scrolls tucked beneath their arms like nervous birds. They bow. You don't. Strict codes. It's not rude if you're the one Rome orbits around. Gentlemen, you announce, clapping your hands, strict codes. Before we get to the endless droning about tribute and boundaries, I thought I'd introduce you to someone. The doors swing open with dramatic flair. Timed just right, because you trained your doorman like a stagehand. In trots Incitatus, draped in a ceremonial robe, mane braided with silver thread, and hooves freshly polished. You hear a gasp. One envoy drops his scroll. This, you say proudly, is Rome's high priest in training. He has opinions on borders too, but they mostly involve oat fields. They stare. A mix of horror and bewilderment hangs in the room like incense. Historians still argue whether this moment was an attempt at satire or psychological warfare. You whisper conspiratorially to no one in particular. I prefer to think of it as art. You feed Incitatus a date, and he snorts appreciatively. The Parthians, unsure of protocol, bow to the horse. You've won. Later, in your private chambers, your advisor Cassianus walks in with an expression somewhere between alarm and defeat. Strict codes. You know the Senate is drafting a formal petition, right? They love petitions. Strict codes. I'm thinking of printing them on my bath towels. They're calling you unstable. You bite into an apple. Better than boring. He sighed so deeply you wonder if it was rehearsed. You've turned the most sacred rituals of Rome into a circus. Wrong, you reply. I've revealed they already were. You stand, robe trailing, and walk over to your mirror, bronze polished and vaguely judgmental. Tell me, Cassianus, do people fear a madman? Or do they fear a mirror that shows them the joke they're living? Cassianus doesn't answer. Probably because there's no safe answer to that question. In the afternoon, you visit the Temple of Mars with your entourage. You're flanked by guards in polished armor, senators who would rather be anywhere else, and of course, Incitatus trotting like he owns the place. Which, let's face it, he sort of does. You lead the horse to the altar. The priests are already sweating. One fumbles with the incense. Another drops the ceremonial knife. You raise your hands and begin a prayer, voice calm and melodic. Strict codes. Like you're narrating a bedtime story, you praise the gods, invoke the glory of Rome, and then, without missing a beat, you ask the spirits for guidance on where best to stable a divine stallion. A priest coughs. Someone faints. You continue. If Mars himself descended from Olympus tomorrow and saw how uninspired your last harvest ceremony was, he'd turn his chariot around and go home. We're bringing style back. The ceremony ends in stunned silence. You whisper to Incitatus, nailed it. That night, as the city cools beneath a rising moon, you attend a private salon, your version of court. Poets, philosophers, and eccentrics gather in a garden lit by oil lamps and wild ideas. A musician plays a haunting tune on the lyre. You sip wine with herbs in it and muse aloud. What if we replace senators with animals entirely? Fewer speeches. More honesty. Laughter ripples, half nervous, half genuine. Someone claps. Someone else nods like it's not completely out of the question. A scholar with ink-stained fingers leans forward. Are you serious, Caesar? You smile. Serious is overrated. He pauses. But is it law? You wink. Depends how many scrolls I sign tomorrow. That night, in your bath, surrounded by marble and steam, you think about power. Real power isn't in the sword or the Senate. It's in making people ask if you're joking, and realizing they're afraid of the answer. You close your eyes. The city hums outside. Somewhere, Incitatus is dreaming of divine oats. Or maybe he's just dreaming of outrunning whatever legacy you're racing toward. Dawn stretches its pale arms across the rooftops of Rome, and once again, you're not entirely sure what day it is. When you're emperor, the calendar stops being a tool and becomes more of a suggestion. Honestly, you've been skipping meetings so often that senators are beginning to bring snacks just in case you don't show up again. But today, you've decided to be responsible, or at least your version of it. Codes, which is why you stride into the Curia Julia like a man arriving at his own surprise party. One he threw for himself, the Senate chamber buzzes with hushed indignation the moment you appear. Robes shuffle, eyes dart, codes. There's a visible wave of spine straightening as senators remember how to act outraged with dignity. You take your usual seat, but not before placing a velvet cushion on the bench. Not for you, of course. For Incitatus, who follows you in with all the pomp of a visiting foreign dignitary. His hooves clack against the marble, and you swear he winks at a tribune. Order. Someone mutters weakly. No need, you say, waving a hand. I've brought the highest authority with me today. Look at that mane. Tell me that isn't wisdom incarnate. One senator actually opens his mouth to protest, but the sound that escapes is somewhere between a cough and a spiritual crisis. Today, you continue, reclining slightly. We'll be discussing taxation reform, border skirmishes, and whether Incitatus would prefer hay imported from Gull or local produce. We're a democracy, after all, of sorts. The scrolls shuffle uncomfortably. Now, historians still argue whether these Senate appearances were genuine attempts at governance or elaborate performance art meant to mock the entire institution. Either way, the effect is undeniable. Nothing makes people question their reality quite like debating agricultural subsidies with a horse in the room. You lean forward. Gentlemen, I've been thinking. What is Rome? Is it stone and senate? Or is it theatre and thunder? Blank stares. One senator stifles a sneeze and accidentally agrees with you. To break the tension, you call for wine. Mid-session, the servant trips over his own sandals trying to keep up. Relax, you tell him. It's just a republic. We can always build another. Incitatus nates approvingly. You raise your goblet. See, he agrees. After this masterclass in civic duty, you retreat to your gardens, sprawling across a chaise as philosophers file in like unpaid interns to your whims. One reads you a passage from Seneca, something about temperance and wisdom. You yawn loudly. Too much virtue. Not enough scandal, you murmur. Another offers you a metaphor about power being like a cup of wine, easy to spill, impossible to refill. You nod solemnly, and yet, you muse, what if the cup is bottomless? They look at you like you've just reinvented the concept of confusing metaphors, which, to be fair, you've done more than once. Then, to keep things interesting, you challenge them all to a game of interpretive poetry. Winner gets a golden spoon. No one knows what that means, but they all participate anyway, because saying no to the emperor is bad for one's longevity. By midday, you're bored again, so naturally, you declare a spontaneous parade. Why? Someone dares to ask. Because it's Tuesday. You respond, which it probably isn't. And my horse looks stunning in crimson. And so the streets fill with music and roses and confused pedestrians. Incitatus prances like he's on the runway of the Roman Fashion Week. If that existed, which, honestly, it should have. The crowd cheers mostly out of awe, partly out of fear, and at least one baker throws loaves into the air like celebratory confetti. Somewhere from a balcony, a woman shouts, "Long live the emperor!" And then, after a pause, "And his magnificent beast!" You bow. The horse nods. Rome spins. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. That evening, in the quieter corners of the Palatine, your mother's old, confident visits. A grey-eyed woman with a whisper like winter wind. Strict codes. Your uncle would have flayed you for this, she says not unkindly. You smile, and he'd be bored doing it. I like to keep ghosts on their toes. She narrows her eyes. You mock the gods, the state, and the past. Not mock. You correct. I remix. Historians still argue whether your eccentricities were a symptom of inherited instability or a calculated dismantling of tradition by someone who saw too clearly. Either way, they keep writing books about you. You'd probably love that part. By moonlight, you dine in your atrium. Candlelight flickers across your face as you feed grapes to Incitatus, now wearing a necklace of pearls. Not because he asked for it, but because it brings out the wisdom in his eyes. You turn to your steward. Remind me tomorrow. I want to paint his hoofprints in gold leaf across the library floor. Of course, Caesar. And schedule another Senate session. Topic: should Rome adopt a national anthem written entirely in Nays? The steward blinks. As a thought experiment, org? Obviously. You say with a smirk, we're not barbarians. Incitatus whinnies. Somewhere in the city, a senator weeps softly into his pillow. You stretch, satisfied. Honestly, I don't know why more rulers don't do this. Being terrifying and fabulous is a lost art. Another morning in imperial Rome, and you awaken not to an alarm, but to a lyre softly plucked from the periphery of your consciousness. The strings tremble with reverence, each note meant to coax you back into reality like you're some half-wild deity who needs to be wooed from their dreams. Which, in your mind, you kind of are. You sit up slowly, the silk sheets slipping off your shoulders like the toga of a retiring senator. Incitatus is already awake, codes, gazing at you with the calm knowing of a creature who has been worshipped, brushed, and likely offered roasted figs before sunrise. You nod at him. He bows his head slightly. Mutual respect. The imperial bath has already been drawn, perfumed with crushed roses and warmed to the temperature of political gossip. As your attendants scrub and hum, you begin mentally composing a speech that no one asked for but everyone will be forced to endure. Something about the metaphysical rights of statues or how lives are the true currency of empires. After toweling off, you don a robe embroidered with stars, literal constellations stitched in gold thread. You're not just emperor anymore. You are, depending on the angle, Rome's resident philosopher, King Dreamweaver. Think Plato in eyeliner. Today's first order of business. Summoning the priests. You've decided Incitatus needs a role more spiritual. He's already been declared consul in waiting. Now, you want to explore his religious potential. High Priest of Vesta sounds too flammable. You mutter, lounging on a daze while your scribes jot notes furiously. Maybe something less. Kindling, adjacent. Priest of Mercury. No, he's not fast enough. Bacchus. Your steward courts politely. There is no precedent, sire, for inducting a horse into the sacred priesthood. You tilt your head. Exactly. That's what makes it sacred. No one's ruined it yet. Historians still argue whether you truly intended to anoint Incitatus into the religious hierarchy of Rome, or whether this was all part of your larger satire of institutional rigidity. Regardless, you instruct the Vestal virgins to prepare a ceremonial wreath and request a special saddle be consecrated at the Temple of Mars. Word spreads fast. By midday, Rome is buzzing with debate. Some call you mad. Others claim you're divine. One bakery even begins selling sanctified stallion loaves in the shape of horseshoes. They're chewy. You're flattered. You stroll through the forum with Incitatus beside you, his coat gleaming like sun-warmed marble. Citizens bow, or pretend to tie their sandals rather than risk eye contact. You pause at a shrine and light incense. For good fortune, you declare, and for the continued wisdom of my equine spiritual advisor. The incense flares dramatically. You're not entirely sure if that's divine approval or just cheap resin. As evening falls, you host a banquet, not a small one. No, this is an affair of pillows, peacocks, and a pianist flown in from Hispania. The theme, divine nonsense. Incitatus is given the place of honor, draped in a purple sash and garlanded with thyme. Because that's what the poet said wise men smelled like. He served apples on silver platters and a goblet of wine. Don't worry, it's watered down. Some guests attempt to joke about the situation. So, Caesar, a young senator chuckles nervously. Shall we expect sermons from Incitatus on the mysteries of Jupiter next? You narrow your eyes. Only if he finds time between miracles. The room quiets. You smirk, crisis averted. The real chaos, however, begins when you propose building a shrine within the palace dedicated to all misunderstood gods and honorary deities such as Incitatus. Think of it. You muse aloud to your inner circle. A sanctuary for ideas too strange to fail. We'll hang wind chimes carved from broken tablets. Maybe plant a tree that grows sideways. Art that argues with itself. Your architect jots frantic notes while whispering to his assistant. He wants a sideways tree. How do you plant a sideways tree? Gently, you reply, because you have ears like a sphinx and timing like a comedian. Later, as the banquet winds down, you recline with a belly full of honeyed duck and questionable philosophy. Your philosopher in residence leans over, emboldened by wine. Emperor, may I ask, is all this pageantry truly belief, or elaborate theatre? You stare into your goblet as if it contains the cosmos, strict codes. Does it matter? You ask softly. When the people kneel, is it for the gods or the drama? He doesn't answer. Not because he doesn't know, but because there is no answer. At least, not one that fits neatly into prose. By the time you drift back to your bedchamber, moonlight casting silver shadows across the walls, Incitatus is already dozing on a velvet mat beside your throne chair. You glance at him fondly. Tomorrow, you murmur, we'll start designing your temple. He flicks an ear in approval, or maybe in his sleep. And though the empire around you murmurs in uncertainty, and scholars scribble furiously trying to decipher your motives, you sleep peacefully. Because for once, you've done exactly what you wanted. And so far, no lightning bolts. Morning light trickles through the colored glass of your palace windows like melted jewels, smearing red and gold across the marble floor. You sit at your writing desk, sipping something spiced and expensive, as your fingers toy with a quill made from a swan's feather. Naturally, only the left wing. The right wings, you're told, are unlucky. You nod solemnly at this wisdom as if it wasn't something you just made up 2 sips ago. Incitatus stands nearby on a slightly elevated dais of polished granite, chewing thoughtfully on a bundle of lavender. His mane has been braided by the palace groom, tiny bells hidden inside the weave. With every flick of his head, he sounds faintly like a celestial wind chime. Today's project, the groundwork for Incitatus' temple, the priests' strict codes, still unsure if they're being mocked or canonized, stand before you in their long robes, clutching scrolls and sweating like amphorae in the sun. One brave soul clears his throat. Divine Emperor, may we ask what? Specifically, this temple is to honor. You lean back, cracking your knuckles like a god preparing to sculpt mountains. Dignity, you reply, and the boldness of believing in something no one else dares to. They blink. Also oats, you add, glancing at Incitatus. He's made several requests. The temple will stand near the Circus Maximus, where the people can worship between races and where Incitatus, from a ceremonial balcony, might offer a nade of blessing. You sketch the layout with sweeping gestures. The roof shaped like a horseshoe, the columns carved to look like rearing stallions. And of course, a central altar with a bronze hoofprint, perpetually surrounded by offerings of fruit and ribbon. Architects scurry. Carvers begin measuring stones. You assign a team of poets to compose the founding hymn, instructing them to channel equal parts awe and absurdity. Historians still argue whether any of these plans ever left the page. There's no surviving temple to Incitatus. But then again, so much of Roman grandeur lived briefly in whispers and imagination. Your reign, it seems, was more theatre than construction, more myth than mortar. Still, the city buzzes with speculation. Some citizens mock, some weep. Others, inspired by your audacity, begin worshipping unlikely icons of their own. One man claims his favorite sandal communicates with the underworld. Another anoints a cabbage in oil and declares it the reincarnation of Cicero. The boundaries between parody and belief begin to blur. And in that strange liminal space, between sincerity and spectacle, you thrive. The Senate, predictably, is less amused. They summon you to discuss the urgent matter of religious stability. You arrive late, wearing a tunic embroidered with astrological symbols, trailed by a flute player and Incitatus, his hooves polished, his attitude indifferent. A senator rises, trembling with carefully disguised frustration. Caesar, we are Rome. We are republic in soul, if not in structure. What message do we send when a horse wears laurels and priests sing to hay bales? You smile, slow and bright. Perhaps that faith should be felt, not legislated. Another senator slams his scroll. This is sacrilege! You raise a brow. Aso was crucifying a god. But look how that turned out. The room sucks in its breath like a single nervous lung. You leave shortly after, draped in smug silence, Incitatus clopping softly behind you. Back at the palace, your mood has shifted. Not darker exactly, just quieter. You retire to your private garden, a walled oasis where lemon trees bend their branches low and the air smells of thyme and wet stone. You sit cross-legged by the fountain, watching ripples shudder across the surface. Sometimes you wonder if this madness is brilliance in disguise, or if it's brilliance that simply changed masks one too many times. Incitatus nuzzles your shoulder. You pat his nose. "Do you think they'll remember this, old friend?" you whisper. "Any of it." He whinnies gently. Probably a yes. That evening, you commission a play. Not just any play, a full-blown tragicomedy titled The Ascension of Incitatus. You write the outline yourself, pacing beneath torchlight, dictating lines between gulps of wine and bites of honey-soaked almonds. The plot is simpling a horse, misunderstood by the world, codes, ascends to godhood while the people argue whether he is worthy. At the climax, he speaks, not in neighs, but in thunder, and reveals that the gods have been watching all along, disguised as animals to test mankind's humility. You grin as the scribes scribble furiously. It's metaphor, you explain, and also not. The actors rehearse for days. The premiere is set for the theatre of Marcellus. Citizens line up in droves, unsure if they're about to witness blasphemy or brilliance. Spoiler, it's both. By the time the curtain falls and the horse-costumed lead bows with facts divine grace, the crowd is on its feet, applauding, laughing, crying, a few even praying. It's hard to tell where mockery ends and faith begins. And you sit in your imperial box, stroking your chin, wondering how many more temples you could get away with before the Senate spontaneously combusts. Probably at least 2. The morning after the play's triumphant debut, you rise feeling oddly refreshed, as if theatre itself has exorcised a portion of your chaos. Rome hums with whispers of the performance. Some celebratory, others clutching their pearls so tightly they're practically inhaling them. You stretch, yawn, and wave away your steward's offer of a robe. Instead, you stride nude onto your balcony, arms wide, proclaiming, "Another glorious day to honor the divine stallion." A passerby below drops his fig. Incitatus whinnies approvingly from his marble pavilion, now adorned with fresh laurels and a golden water true gifted by an enamored merchant who's hoping for divine favor. Or maybe just tax leniency. Hard to say. Today, your calendar includes an audience with several provincial envoys, a private symposium on the philosophy of absurdity, and a casual inspection of the temple construction site. You skip the first 2 and head straight to the builders. The foundation stones are in place. The workers, though visibly confused, are oddly reverent. They've started calling the main stone the hoofprint of fate. You say nothing. It's better they think it means something. Everything's more powerful when it might be a metaphor. Your lead architect bows deeply. "Caesar, we've run into our creative difference regarding the statue centerpiece." You blink. He must be rearing. The man frowns. Strict codes. But no horse can be sculpted like that without the rear legs being anchored. It'll collapse under its own. Then carve it from bronze and chain it to heaven. You interrupt. Use magic. Or theatre. Or both. He doesn't argue further. Later, lounging beneath a canopy of silken gauze, you scribble down sermon ideas for Incitatus' upcoming ordination. It's important that his first homily, delivered by a trained orator in an elaborate horse mask, sets the right tone. You settle on a message of humility, because that's always ironic coming from a being elevated above all humans. And besides, what's more humbling than being reminded your emperor believes a horse is holier than you? That evening, at a dinner party with your usual entourage of poets, wrestlers, mystics, and at least one suspiciously mute flute player, you toast to divine nonsense. One poet raises a brow. "Is that an actual religion now?" You grin. "Not yet. But wait until I declare a sacred calendar based on Incitatus' bowel movements." Everyone laughs, then pauses. You're probably not joking. Over honeyed duck and spiced wine, the conversation turns philosophical. You argue that truth is merely the most convincing lie, and madness is the final frontier of reason. The poet nods solemnly. The wrestler belches his agreement. The flute player remained silent. Obviously. Historians still argue whether you truly believed your own doctrines, or if it was all one enormous social experiment. Was the empire your canvas? Was Incitatus just a surrealist sculpture in political form? Or were you simply broken by power, like a marble bus left too long in the rain? You don't offer clarity, because clarity is for cowards. The next day, a group of senators delivers a formal plea: abandon the temple plans. For the good of the empire, for tradition, for sanity. You listen patiently, chin resting in your palm, eyes half-lidded with boredom. When they finish, you rise slowly and walk to Incitatus. You kiss his muzzle. The room holds its breath. Do you know what's madder than worshipping a horse? You ask. No one dares answer. Pretending we're still in control of anything. You murmur, this city lives and dies by symbols. Let mine be hooved. One senator faints. Another excuses himself to weep behind a column. You return to your writing desk, where the script for the Ascension of Incitatus, Volume 2 awaits your edits. In this one, he'll cure blindness and levitate. Probably also walk on wine. You chuckle at the thought. Outside, a group of children reenact scenes from the play. One, wearing a paper mane, declares himself Saint Stallion of the Moon and blesses passing pigeons with dramatic hoof gestures. You watch them for a long time. That evening, you ride Incitatus through the streets. Not in a chariot, not surrounded by guards, just you and your holy horse beneath a cascade of orange lantern light. People line the road. Some cheer, some cross themselves. A few kneel. You stop at a crossroads and dismount. There, you pour wine into the dirt, whispering something only the cobblestones hear. May this madness outlive me, perhaps. Or maybe, strict codes. Tell me this isn't the only way they'll remember me. Either way, the wind answers with silence. Later that night, as the moon curls like a half-closed eye above Rome, you dream of galloping across the sky, hooves striking stars like flint. Incitatus is beside you, not behind, beside. When you wake, the vision lingers. You summon your scribe and dictate a new law. All temples shall have room for laughter. The scribe hesitates, then writes. Because why not? Rome is already halfway to comedy. You're just giving it a punchline. Morning dew glistens on the palace marble, strict, and your feet echo softly as you walk the corridor toward the stables. Not because you're checking on Incitatus. He has 3 attendants, and a personal astrologer for that, but because today's agenda includes a ceremony you've invented overnight. You call it the equine benediction. The idea came to you between spoonfuls of honeyed barley porridging. If you're to establish Incitatus as a spiritual figure, his blessings must be shared, and since his hooves can't exactly hold a scepter, you settle on symbolic gestures. You order a polished silver horseshoe engraved with laurels to be pressed to the foreheads of petitioners. Think of it as a divine stamp, strict codes, or a slightly more aggressive hug. As your entourage prepares the forum for the rite, you pause to admire a statue of Augustus, not out of reverence. He lacked your sense of drama, but to gauge the pigeons. They favor his head as a perch, which amuses you. No matter how powerful a man becomes, nature still gives him a feathery hat if he stands still too long. Your mind drifts to an awkward truthing. The Senate is growing restless. Whispers fill the bathhouses and libraries, weaving through Rome like vines on a cracked wall. Some say you've become unfit to rule, strict codes. Others fear you've tapped into some unknowable, godlike wisdom that cannot be questioned. Historians still argue whether your behavior was a calculated mockery of authority or the unraveling of a deeply traumatized soul. One school of thought paints you as a proto-performance artist. Another as a textbook narcissist with a flair for equestrian comedy. The third, they just throw their hands up and say, Caligula. Meanwhile, your new holiday dawns. You ride into the forum with Incitatus bedecked in violet silk, trumpets blare. The crowd, bribed with free bread and wine, cheers louder than usual. You dismount with exaggerated grace and signal the first pilgrim. An old woman steps forward. She kneels. A priest, wearing the approved horse mask of divine ceremony, presses the silver horseshoe to her brow. She murmurs thanks, kisses incitator's hoof, and shuffles away beaming. You're not sure if she's blessed or just pleasantly buzzed, but it doesn't matter. Perception is reality, that's the whole trick. Next up, a baker, a child, 2 guards, and a man dressed as a fish for no discernible reason. You nod approvingly. The absurd attracts the absurd. Later, in your private garden, reclining on silk pillows under lemon trees, you ponder what's next. Incitatus is now a spiritual icon, sure, but where does that energy go? Easing festivals. You summon your scribes to plan Equinalia, a multi-day celebration of all things divine and hoofed. Events will include a chariot ballot, a neigh off, in which participants mimic Incitatus's neigh for applause, competitive prancing scored on flair and rhythm, a poetry contest restricted to odes about the emperor's horse. One bold scribe asks if there will be sacrifices. Only of dignity, you reply. They all laugh, nervously. In the weeks that follow, Rome transforms. Vendors sell miniature Incitatus figurines. Children wear horse masks made of painted bark. A graffiti artist sketches a hallowed Incitatus urinating golden light on Mount Olympus. You send him a fruit basket. Your personal astrologer notes that Mars has entered an alignment of mischief, which explains why the Senate keeps trying to meet without you. One senator even suggests reinstating the Republic. You send him a single hoofprint stamped into clay, no explanation. He resigns. Yet in private, beneath your silk canopies and perfumed oils, you find yourself growing oddly quiet. Not sad, never that, but introspective. You once dreamed of commanding legions and sculpting a golden age. Now, your monument is a horse, and still, it feels almost right. One evening, while strolling the Palatine Gardens, you encounter a philosopher you'd once spared from exile. He's ancient, bearded, and probably hallucinating half the time, but you like his company. You tell him your latest idea, renaming the months after Incitatus's moods. Wimbrewery is your favorite. The philosopher stares, then chuckles. At least you amuse the gods. You smirk. I'm not here to amuse them. I'm here to outdo them, he nods. Then pray your horse is faster than Nemesis. You pause, genuinely rattled. Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution, the one who always catches those who dare fly too high. Like Icarus, or any mortal with hubris. You wave him off and return to your quarters, but the name lingers in the air like smoke. Nemesis. That night, sleep slips from you like silk from a startled servant. You stare at the ceiling, watching torchlight flicker in hypnotic ripples. Incitatus is nearby, dozing, untroubled by myth or consequence. You whisper into the dark, half serious, half sarcastic, "If I fall, will you take the reins?" The horse snorts once, or maybe answers, "You can't tell anymore." And honestly, you kind of like it that way. By now, you're pretty sure your legacy is going to involve a horse more than any conquest or building project. Fine by you. Rome has enough pillars. What it needs, clearly, is inspiration. And who better to offer it than a creature who never speaks, never lies, and never argues about taxes? Incitatus, as you recline and watch him munch his golden oats under a canopy of peacock feathers, has become more than a companion. He's a concept, a lifestyle, a vibe, but Rome, being Rome, insists on treating you like an emperor, with expectations, meetings, governors whining about grain shortages, generals requesting more troops, and, of course, senators desperate to keep their heads while pretending they admire your visionary leadership. You make them wait. Instead, you hold court in your garden where you've just had a small amphitheater installed, the audiencing poets, musicians, dancers, and one man who claims to communicate exclusively through bird calls. You dub him the official avian interpreter of the imperial court. His only job, translating Incitatus's neighs into policy recommendations. One evening, you announce your boldest move yet. You're going to consecrate Incitatus as Pontifex Equinus Maximus, the supreme priest of the new horse-centric theology you're kind of inventing as you go. It's half parody, half spiritual awakening, and fully entertaining. Your inner circle blinks, then claps, slowly. Even now, historians still argue whether this was a tongue-in-cheek mockery of Roman religiosity or the result of prolonged insomnia and fermented date wine. Some say you were making a point, that religion is performance. Others suggest you'd finally snapped under the pressure of power, family trauma, and palace intrigue. One fringe theory, that you were conducting an elaborate psychological experiment to expose loyalty among your ranks. Spoiler, many failed. Regardless, the ceremony proceeds. You commission a sacred robe sewn with crushed pearl threads and lavender line, tailored to drape over Incitatus's back like a divine toga. A golden laurel is fashioned for his ears. You yourself lead the ceremony, barefoot on a carpet of roses, chanting a hymn written earlier that morning and, frankly, not your best work. You ream, hey with, pray, 4 times. Strict codes, the crowd doesn't mind. They're here for the spectacle. And the free wine. As you anoint Incitatus with olive oil and declare him the intercessor between gods and men, a faint breeze rustles the garden leaves. The sun catches the horse's coat just so, and for one surreal moment you almost believe it. So do a few others. The next day, a senator sends you a formal petition, blessed by His Holiness Incitatus, requesting a pardon for his cousin. You laugh for a full minute, then grant it. The man knew how to play the game. This catches on. Soon, more nobles are genuflecting to the stall, offering sugar cubes and whispered prayers in exchange for your favor. Incitatus starts receiving gifts, an ivory feeding true, a sapphire-encrusted bridle, and, most confusingly, a bust of himself carved in marble by a sculptor from Rhodes. You place the bust beside your bed. Still, not everything is roses and oats. The Senate simmers beneath the surface. Some of the old guard have grown bolder, meeting in secret, muttering about restoring order and preserving the dignity of Rome. You call one such senator in for a private meeting. He's sweating before he even sits down. I hear, you say, sipping wine, that some people are uncomfortable with Incitatus. Elevation. He stammers, then tries to flatter you. It's innovative, my emperor, daring. A bold fusion of symbolism and satire. You say. And yet, here you are, sweating through your toga. He tries to laugh, you don't. Instead, you lean forward. Tell me, Senator, do you think a horse has more dignity than a man who lies to keep his seat? He doesn't answer. You dismissed him. He retires to the countryside a week later, permanently. Around this time, strange rumors begin to swirl around the empire, about oracles dreaming of 4-hooved gods, about desert winds whispering the name Incitatus, about a sacred stallion born under a comet in Parthia. You've done none of this. Rome just runs with it. Myth, like gossip, feeds itself. You lean into it. Why not? You create a new coin stamped not with your own face, but with Incitatus's profile, complete with laurel crown and regal snort. The people love it, or at least they pretend to. Either way it works. Every now and then, you glance out at the horizon and wonder if you've gone too far. Not morally, just logistically. Like, is it physically possible to appoint a horse to lead a religious ceremony at Jupiter's temple without some kind of equine accident? Turns out, yes, as long as you reinforce the marble steps. That evening, after Incitatus performs a quiet blessing, involving a bow and a well-timed tail flick, you host a lavish feast. One of the courses is molded to resemble hay, though it's actually sweetened fig paste. You joke that it's the food of the gods, and someone at the table weeps from laughter, or fear, maybe both. You don't mind. The line between satire and sanctity has always been thin in Rome. You're just the first to openly gallop across it. The days drift onward in a haze of incense, citrus blossoms, and the muffled clatter of hooves on marble. Incitatus, now comfortably enthroned in the public imagination as both equine oracle and divine emissary, has his own attendants. They brush him with swan feather fans, whisper affirmations into his ears, and, on particularly festive days, compose little sonnets in Latin praising his gentle wisdom and celestial tail flick. You listen to these verses with half-lidded eyes and a smirk, wine sloshing lazily in your goblet. There is something about watching Rome's finest minds compose spiritual hymns for a horse that tickles your tired soul. Meanwhile, word of your four-legged prophet spreads across the empire like wildfire, or olive oil on a too-hot pan. In Alexandria, philosophers convene to debate what a horse priest implies about the unity of soul and flesh. In Gaul, a local chieftain sends you a ceremonial saddle as tribute, embossed with his clan's emblem and a note reading, "To the blessed beast." You hang it in the banquet hall. The provincial governors begin issuing small festivals in Incitator's honor. These are unofficial, of course. No edict from you. But somehow, statues of the horse begin popping up in town squares, often flanked by doves or holding grapes in their mouths like offerings. You're delighted. Incitatus, less so. He seems confused by all the attention. You pet him gently and reassure him that even divine beings get a little tired of public life. He neighs softly. You interpret this as a sign of reluctant acceptance. Or maybe he's just hungry again. At court, a new wave of sycophants has emerged. These ones specialize in horse metaphors. Emperor, your leadership gallops beyond compare. Your policies leap hurdles with unparalleled grace. May your wisdom neigh through the ages. You stop them there. Some puns are punishable. Still, you let most of it slide. After all, if you can declare your horse a priest, surely people are allowed to be weird about it. One ambitious bureaucrat even suggests creating a new calendar system based on Incitatus' birthday. You consider it for about 12 seconds before moving on. And then comes the visit from the Parthian delegation. They arrive wearing layers of silk and suspicion. Parthia, Rome's eternal rival in the East, has always been fond of passive aggression, and today is no exception. They bow low, present gifts, gilded arrows, a miniature sphinx, and finally, a curious offering, a live peacock with a delicate gold collar. For the high priest, they say with overly polite smiles. You raise an eyebrow, strict codes, they don't blink. Incitatus regards the peacock with what can only be described as side-eye. The bird squawks and immediately regrets being part of an international political gesture. You sip your wine and let the tension hang. Eventually, you wave your hand. Let the priest consider this in prayer, which is your new favorite way to end awkward conversations. You retreat to the baths. Historians still argue whether this moment was a turning point in foreign diplomacy or just another bizarre flex in your increasingly theatrical reign. Strict codes. Some believe you were testing Parthia's composure, seeing how far they'd follow your madness before revealing their hand. Others argue genuinely thought Incitatus might develop a spiritual rapport with peacocks. To be fair, one did briefly ride on his back during a ceremony. It was majestic and deeply confusing. Your relationship with the Senate continues its slow burn into absurdity. Senators are now divided into unofficial factions. The horse loyalists, who praise your divine beast in public and write suspiciously florid poetry about his mane, and the traditionalists, who whisper in corners and look very tired. To amuse yourself, you summon them for a midnight council. No agenda, just a surprise poetry slam. Theming the hoofprints of destiny. You hand out laurel wreaths made of parsley to the winners. Stricts, Incitatus receives a standing ovation when a servant reads a haiku allegedly authored by him. Hey is not enough, my spirit gallops through stars, where's my second groom? Is it real? Absolutely not. But the effect is dazzling. Back at your villa, you've converted one of the terraces into Incitatus' meditation garden. It's mostly just a shaded patch with lavender, mint, and the occasional visiting owl. You like to lie beside him in the evenings, your robe open, your crown discarded, gazing up at the stars while your advisors try to figure out whether you've transcended mortal ambition or just completely unraveled. One night, a thunderstorm rolls in over the hills. The rain comes down hard and fast, soaking the polished stones of the courtyard. You rush to Incitatus's stall barefoot, slipping slightly, the hem of your tunic dragging through puddles. There he is, calm, dignified, snorting rhythmically as lightning flashes behind him. You lean against the doorway, drenched, and laugh. Not the mad, echoing cackle the writers of later centuries will claim, but a quiet, tired laugh. The kind that says, "How did I end up here? And also, let's see how far I can take this." Because even now, after priesthood, poetry, and peacocks, you're not finished. The empire, like a massive, snorting chariot, still thunders forward. But you've let go of the reins. You're riding side saddle with a horse who might be a god or just an extremely well-fed equine. And somehow, it works. You wake to incense and murmured prayers drifting in through the colonnade. At first, you think you've dreamt it, a vision of some sunlit temple. But no, that's just Marcus, your latest point, priest, offering morning devotions to Incitatus. Again, he's kneeling before a carved altar of cedar and lapis lazuli, placed conveniently just outside the horse's stable. The altar is elaborate. The previous version had fewer scented oils and 0 citrus garlands. But Marcus has enhanced the ambience. As part of his ongoing campaign to be named High Deacon of the Divine Hoof, that's not a real title. Yet, inside the stable, Incitatus chews with magnificent indifference. This isn't even the strangest moment of your morning. That award goes to the Senate's latest decree, which arrives on a scroll tied with ribbon and trembling fingers. They have officially voted to grant Incitatus a ceremonial residence in the Palatine Hill. Fully staffed, furnished, and with its own mosaic floor featuring prancing horses and celestial comets. You're both bewildered and impressed. The Senate has leaned fully into the absurdity. Like an improv troupe refusing to break character, you suppose this is their way of keeping peace. If they play along with your divine pet project, maybe they won't get exiled, or worse, invited to another poetry slam. It's a valid strategy, and you're not cruel. Not really. Not unless someone touches your wine without asking. Incitatus now receives correspondence, actual letters, from citizens requesting blessings, career advice, and on one occasion, a recipe for better lentils. That last one you answer personally. No need to deny the people there come in. The absurdity keeps layering. Today, a group of traveling musicians performs an original opera about Incitatus. Celestial journey from stable to sanctum. The costumes are lavish. One poor actor spends 3 hours on stage in a horse mask, galloping from one side to the other as Sopranus wail in Latin. At the finale, a papier mye chi sun descends from the ceiling and the audience throws roses. You clap until your hands ache. Historians still argue whether you orchestrated all of this purely to mock the aristocracy, or if, by this point, you truly believed in Incitatus' divine mission. Some accounts suggest you wept during the second act. Others claim you fell asleep mid-performance and only woke up when the fake sun hit you on the head. The truth? Well, like most things in Imperial Rome, it's slippery. Later that week, during a banquet, codes one of your advisors to gently suggest perhaps it's time to move on from the whole equine priesthood phase. You respond by asking if Jupiter ever got tired of being a god. Then you offer him a fig, wait for him to eat it, and whisper, "That was grown on sacred horse, blessed soil." He chokes slightly but nods gravely. Message received. You retire to your garden that night with a scroll of poetry supposedly dictated by Incitatus. You read it aloud, dramatically, under torchlight. To whinny is to pray ul, to graze is to reflect deeple nay is yes, but loud. It's terrible. But the moon is full, the air smells like rosemary, and you're not entirely sure you didn't feel something stir in your soul. Or maybe it was just the wine. Regardless, you nod approvingly. Divine insight. You whisper to the owl perched nearby. It blinks twice. You take that as agreement. In a strange twist, Incitatus begins to attract imitators. Across the provinces, lesser nobles start elevating their own animals. A senator in Hispania declares his pet goat a spiritual medium, strict codes. A merchant in Carthage announces his parrot as a prophet. There's even a rumor that in northern Britannia, a warlord has founded a shrine dedicated to a cow who supposedly cured 3 children of coughs by sneezing on them. You receive reports on all of this and file them away in your mental scrapbook of things that should not work but somehow do. You toast to the cow. All of this animal defecation has strange side effects. The empire becomes slightly more peaceful. People are too busy composing hymns for their livestock or debating whether their pets have achieved divine awareness to riot over taxes. Even the gladiator matches take on a more philosophical bent. One fighter enters the arena wearing a horse head mask and declares himself a disciple of hoofed justice. He loses, but the crowd loves it. You suspect this wasn't what the gods intended. Or maybe it's exactly what they intended and everyone's just been misreading the omens for the past 1,000 years. One night, you're visited by a dream. In it, you stand in a great marble hall, endless and glowing. Incitatus walks beside you, his hooves echoing like thunder. At the far end stands a throne carved from stars. You gesture for him to take it. He bows, his mane glistening with stardust. When you wake, you immediately summon your mousicist. New floor, you say, get to work. That day, a scribe timidly informs you of rumors in the east. A self-proclaimed prophet claims you are the reincarnation of Apollo, sent to herald a new age of divine animal unity. He even has a small cult forming. You snort and wave him off. Only if Apollo liked figs this much. Still, you make a mental note to send them a basket of grapes and some incense. Always good to support your fanbase. By now, Incitatus's influence is woven into the empire's fabric. He's featured on commemorative coins, shown mid-nate with a laurel wreath. His image is painted in temples, included in blessings, and invoked in particularly difficult childbirths. One woman swears her labor eased the moment a priest whispered, steady as the sacred stallion. Whether or not it's real hardly matters anymore. You've created a myth. And in Rome, myth often outruns memory. The day begins with a small diplomatic crisis. The ambassador from Parthia, draped in golden silks and furiously bearded, refuses to enter the imperial reception hall until the beast is removed. You sip your wine slowly and glance toward Incitatus, who is reclining on a custom velvet chaise, freshly groomed, wearing a garland of violets and pointedly ignoring the ambassador. You lift an eyebrow. You mean his reverence. The Parthian sputters, then mutters something in his native tongue that sounds suspiciously like madman, though you can't confirm. Regardless, you insist Incitatus remain. After all, this is his empire too, technically. Maybe. Historians still argue whether you ever legally appointed the horse as co-consul. Some records suggest a rushed ceremony involving grapes and a confused trumpet player. Others say it was merely a practical joke that spiraled wildly out of hand. Strict codes. Either way, the ambassador stays, mostly because you threaten to replace him with a more horse-friendly delegate. He ends up offering a tribute of 3 camels and an obsidian dagger, so you consider it a win for equine diplomacy. Your court has grown weirder by the day. Poets, artists, and philosophers jockey for the horse's attention, composing odes like O Snorting Oracle of Dawn, and painting frescoes where Incitatus delivers sermons from mountaintops. You've even heard someone is working on a full-length tragedy. Hoff and Laurel, chronicling the inner turmoil of a horse torn between the stable and the Senate. It premieres in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Incitatus receives another promotion, Pontifex Euphemus Maximus, chief priest of the divine stable. Strict codes, the rituals are getting out of hand. Today's began with a ceremonial oats offering, followed by an interpretive dance meant to evoke the soul of the pasture. One senator twisted his ankle mid-leap. You awarded him a medallion for devotion in the line of prance. And still, Incitatus remains magnificently unbothered. You've begun to wonder if he knows. It's hard to tell with horses. Sometimes you catch him watching people with unnerving stillness, like he's listening, judging, plotting. One day, you're fairly certain he nodded when someone proposed a tax reform. Or maybe he just wanted an apple. Either way, you issued the decree. Outside the palace, the city has adapted. Horse-shaped pastries sell briskly in the forum. Children wear little hoof-shaped charms. A popular board game has emerged, Nay or Nay, where players pretend to be minor officials trying to guess the horse's divine will. Strict codes. It's wildly complicated and makes no sense, but that doesn't stop taverns from hosting tournaments. You wander through the streets in disguise one evening, something you do more often these days. Not out of fear, but curiosity. Rome pulses with strange, surreal energy. The walls are covered with
Grafting insi you velt, incitatus wilt, double squad priest.
Titsky Maki hey, not war. Even the cynics have leaned in. One grizzled merchant mutters, at least a horse can't raise taxes. You smirk and resist the urge to inform him of next quarter's budget plan. It includes a levy for stable construction. Back at the palace, your advisors look increasingly bewildered, but no one dares oppose you directly. Well, except for Cassianus, your former financial minister. He tried. Once, suggested publicly that Incitatus was, perhaps, not entirely qualified for divine office. You replaced him with a marble bust of the horse. Oddly, the empire's treasury improved slightly afterward. Historians love the anecdote. They also obsess over your psyche. Were you mad? Brilliant, strict codes, a satirist ahead of your time. A lonely boy who never outgrew his pony dreams. Some say Incitatus was merely a mirror, reflecting Rome's absurdities back at itself. Others argue he was a coping mechanism, strict codes. A gentle rebellion against a world that demanded constant blood and seriousness. And then there are those who believe you were simply bored. Whatever the truth, the cult of Incitatus continues to grow. You now receive prayer scrolls from remote provinces, asking for fertility blessings, better harvests, and forgiveness for accidentally stepping on horse droppings. You establish a minor clerical order whose sole duty is to burn incense and hum vaguely hoarse-like lullabies at sunrise. You commission a holy text, Equestrian Epistles, which is mostly parables about grass and patience. Your favorite is the one where Incitatus teaches a greedy merchant the value of stillness by sitting on his wares for 3 days. The moral is unclear, but the drawing is priceless. At night, you sit beside Incitatus' marble water true, drinking wine and throwing olives into it like stones into a wishing well. Sometimes, you talk to him about your youth, your loneliness, your bafflement at how the world spins on. He doesn't respond, of course. But he doesn't trot away either. The stars wheel overhead. Somewhere a donkey brays. You sigh. Suppose I made you pope. You whisper. Would that be too much? Incitatus snorts, then sneezes. You decide to sleep on it, but not before jotting the idea down on parchment. You title it Divine Promotion Pending. That night, your dreams are stranger than usual. You walk through a temple of glass and gold. Incitatus stands at the center, wings unfurled. He opens his mouth and speaks. Not in words, but music. A sound like oceans and thunder. You kneel. The music flows into your bones. When you wake, your pillow is damp, and your cheek bears the imprint of a horseshoe seal. There are hoofprints outside your chamber door, but the guards report no visitors. You consider having the floor redone in marble. Easier to clean and more symbolic, obviously. That morning, you draft your boldest decree yet. A holiday. A new festival, to be celebrated every spring, marking the day Incitatus first need in your presence. There will be processions, music, oat-themed snacks, and a dramatic re-enactment of the moment you declared, "Let the beast speak through silence." The Senate approves it unanimously. Well, the senators who still attend. The others send vaguely horse-shaped fruit baskets in approval. The people cheer. And you simply pet Incitatus on his noble nose, offer him a polished apple, and whisper, "Good boy." He eats the apple. You sip your wine, and the empire spins gently on. You wake to the sound of trumpets, but not the usual brassy pomp of imperial fanfare. This is gentler, almost uncertain, like the instrument itself is unsure whether today is a dream or a decree. You stretch beneath silk sheets and sit up slowly, gazing across the room to where Incitatus stands, a backlit by morning light and already halfway through a breakfast platter of figs and honey-soaked barley. You rise, robe yourself in a deep plum toga. one you've had tailored with tiny hoof motifs, and step out onto the balcony. Below you, the forum teems with quiet preparation. Today is the inaugural festival of the Divine Winnie. You'd written the name in jest, but the scribes copied it without blinking, so now it's on everything from stone carvings to novelty tunics. You watch as acrobats in centaur costumes rehearse their choreography. Musicians tune instruments. A group of children in flower garlands practice neighing in unison. It's all absurdly wholesome and oddly moving. You never meant for it to become a movement. Really, it started as a joke, or perhaps an act of rebellion, a prank against the crushing seriousness of empire. But here you are, the ruler of Rome, emperor of the known world, preparing to lead a parade beside a horse who has his own official seal and a preferred brand of incense. Historians still argue whether you believed in it all. Some say you were desperately lonely, that your childhood, full of ceremonial dinners and suspicious smiles, warped your sense of companionship. Others believe you were staging an elaborate critique of power itself, showing that a beast of burden could wear the same laurels as Caesar, and do so with more dignity. And then there are those who insist it was grief, that after your sister Drusilla died, a piece of you splintered beyond repair, and Incitatus became the silent confidant in a palace full of murmurs. It doesn't matter anymore. The people have embraced the myth, and the myth, like all myths, has become truth. The horse is now more than a horse. He is a symbol, a mirror, a saint, a joke, and a prayer, all in one. You descend the palace stairs with Incitatus at your side. He wears a golden wreath today, plus anklets of tiny silver bells. His hooves click against the marble, echoing like a slow drumbeat. The parade begins at midday. You lead it through the city streets, waving to a sea of garlands, banners, and children perched on their fathers' shoulders. Some call your name. Others chant the horses. At one point, someone throws a bouquet of lavender, which Incitatus catches, perfectly, mind you, with a nonchalant turn of his head. You swear he winks at the crowd. It's hard to tell. Later, there's a mock trial in the forum, a comedic performance where a goat accuses a senator of stealing hay. Incitatus presides, gavel tied to one hoof. The goat wins. The actor playing the senator is sentenced to 10 minutes of thinking about what he's done. The crowd roars with laughter. You feel something flutter in your chest. Joy, maybe. The afternoon slips into evening, and the mood grows softer. Lutes and flutes play dreamy melodies. Dancers twirl in candlelight. Vendors pass around roasted apples dusted with cinnamon, declaring them blessed bites. Somewhere, someone releases a dozen white doves and at least one confused chicken. You watch the city glow under a sky tinged pink and gold. Incitatus stands beside you, still and tall. Later, you return to the palace, tired but full. You sit on the steps outside the main hall and let your sandals dangle. The marble is cool beneath you. The scent of jasmine and smoke drifts in the air. For once, there's no pressing issue. No assassination rumors, no failed grain deliveries, no court intrigue, just silence. Just now, you lean back on your hands, look at the stars, and say aloud, "You know, we made it pretty far, old friend." Incitatus snorts, then nuzzles your shoulder. It's enough. You wonder what they'll say of this time. Decades or centuries from now. Will they remember you as mad, as playful, as a tragic figure wrapped in velvet and satire? Or will they speak of the horse priest, the four-hooved oracle who reminded a crumbling empire that even the mighty should sometimes neigh? Historians still argue whether any of it was real. But tonight, in the hush after laughter and before dreams, it feels truer than anything else. The palace settles into its nightly hum. You wander to your bedchamber, Incitatus clopping along behind. You remove your crown, place it gently on a carved pedestal, and slide between linen sheets. Your muscles soften. Your breath slows. Outside the window, Rome flickers quietly beneath moonlight, its ancient stones holding stories too strange and too lovely to forget. You reach out one last time and rest your hand on Incitatus' mane. "Sweet dreams, your reverence," you murmur. He nickers softly, almost a lullaby, and the world goes still. The torches have dimmed now, and Rome hums low and gentle, like the sigh of a sleeping giant. Even the fountains whisper, not bubble. The city that once roared in triumph now murmurs in dreams. You lie in your chamber, limbs heavy, breath quiet. Outside, the hooves of a horse echo one last time against the stones, like the tick of a clock winding down. You imagine Incitatus, curled peacefully in a bed of fresh hay, surrounded by laurels and candlelight. Whatever the world said, whatever they guessed or gossiped, it doesn't matter here. Not in this softness, not in the glow that follows absurdity and grace. You have ruled, laughed, mourned, and wandered. You've crowned a horse, defied an empire, strict codes, and made the marble of Rome echo with chuckles instead of commands. You've reminded a wary world that not every legacy must be forged in blood. Some can be etched in the shape of a hoofprint. So let your thoughts drift now. Let them meander like ivy over ancient stone. Let the stories fade gently into the hush. There will be time tomorrow for reason. Tonight, there is only quiet, only stars.
Only sleep.